That's really the movie. I mean, the story's pretty lacking. The weakest part of this movie is pretty much...
The story is...
Can I actually retract what I just said?
Sure,
What I should say is the weakest part of the story is everything that doesn't happen in flashbacks.
I would agree with that. Which is part of the reason why didn't you just tell the story chronologically? That was one of my takeaways, was I just don't really understand why they told it this way.
And I think you're right. I think because it was adapted from a manga, mangas have like a different style of storytelling, or even they tell stories at vastly different paces than movies. So I think because
they're scams, they need you to keep buying the next one.
Well, but if you think about it, right, it was released the first manga was released in 1970, and it was a weekly manga, right?
How many were there though? Was it a weekly thing for 3 months or?
I couldn't tell you. I had it pulled up on my screen earlier, but I'm not going to look it up now. But there was a lot. But then you also got to remember that the guy who wrote the manga also wrote the screenplay for this.
That's true.
So he was probably writing it exactly or close enough to how he wrote his manga. Well, too, I was going to say this movie ends abruptly, and I know that there's sequels. So I think it ends abruptly because there's a sequel coming. Same with the manga.
The Shogun Assassin, which is the first two movies together, probably just flows right into the next one.
Yeah, I would assume. That's
probably a movie that has somewhat disappeared now that this one is more widely available. I think over time those like Godzilla King of the Monsters, the US re-edit dub version of the original Japanese movie, that seems to be harder and harder to find now that just the original Godzilla is so much more widely accessible than it was in the 90s.
Yeah. And I think now that you have probably most, if not all of these movies on streaming, right? You can literally organically flow into the next one.
Well, Shogun Assassin apparently is streaming on the Criterion channel.
But I guess all in all, I don't really have any complaints about this movie. I don't think it's a boring movie. I quite like the story.
Hell no.
The part that drags the most for me is when he's actually in the village after he's had his sword taken.
Okay. And all the stuff in the present, is
and when he's weaker. Talking to the prostitute and all the people who've been imprisoned in this house and stuff, But again, I'm looking at it as that it's a smaller part of a larger story, so I can't really hate on it for that.
Well, I'll try. My complaint is I think the story would have been stronger if the flashback stuff was just the first act of the movie and we kind of just progressed from there. Mm-hmm. I don't think we learn that much more about Ito's relationship with Daigoro from seeing that scene where he basically is secretly wanting Daigoro to elect to commit suicide.
Yeah.
That we see that halfway through the movie. If that's just the second or third scene of the movie, I think it might even be more meaningful. Mm-hmm. That's a great scene, by the way.
It is.
Like he sets out these two things, like a sword and like a ball.
Yeah.
And he's like, you will choose, you will crawl to these. If you crawl to one, you will go to your mother in heaven. If you crawl to the other, you will become a Ronin with me. And you can tell he actually wants the kid to choose suicide.
I know. He's like, my path is going to be long and dangerous, and I can't take my son. I hope he chooses the ball so I can kill my own son.
Yeah, but no, it's a very good movie. It's a very good movie. From what I remember, I liked this more than I did the first time I saw it. From what I remember, I liked the second one more. And from what I remember, I thought the third one was the one I liked the least. But
okay, well, I'll have to trust you, but I'm sure
there's still that same kind of bloodletting, I'm sure. So
listen, as long as that's in it, I'm fine.